Very good afternoon, pleasant good afternoon to those who are here with us in studio, as we call it, at our usual spot here, and those who will be joining us online or who may view this session, the seminar this afternoon online. We trust once more that it will be an informative and a transformative experience for you, where we're not just sharing information, which is good, and it's always our objective to give sound information, but also information that will really be impactful and help to make our lives much better. All right, so we are here again, another installment of the seminar series that we've been hosting since the start of this year. This will be our 5th, and this time around, we are kind of getting down to, this is very close to home in terms of the name of the foundation that we have started in memory of Dr. AMRIE MORRIS-PATTERSON, the G.I.F.T Foundation. It was captioned that based on her desire to reach out to persons who are really caught up in grief and, as we'll explore later on, complicated grief and trauma. So it's the Grief Intervention and Freedom from Trauma Foundation. And this is important, of course, because of the implications that dealing with grief or not dealing with grief properly can have for our health, not just our mental health, but our health on a whole. All right, so this evening it's really a very challenging topic to deal with, but it is one that we are going to try and tackle as best as we can. And to help us in this challenge this afternoon, as you look at the topic of going beyond grief, and it was subcaptioned, grappling with and growing in grief and loss. Very easy to say, as they say, but harder to do very often. So to help us along with this discussion this evening, we have two very qualified individuals. We have a return guest. She has been with us a couple times, and really we want to thank her for volunteering her time to be here once again. And this is Mrs. Josette Johnson-Graves. She is a school counselor, currently attached to the St. Joseph's Convent, Kingstown, has a Bachelor of Arts in Guidance and Counseling and a Master of Arts in Christian Counseling, hoping to specialize in family therapy. She is a certified divorce recovery coach and is the founder of the Reform Counseling Agency, a faith-based organization that works with individuals and families who have experienced relational trauma, more specifically infidelity, separation, and divorce. Even more, she is the facilitator of the St. Vincent chapter of Fresh Start Divorce Recovery, a support group for persons recovering from divorce. Mrs. Graves enjoys spending time with her husband, Steve, and son, RJ. She also loves to travel, listen to music, and watch reruns of Tom and Jerry. Her mantra is, "We are all a little broken, but anyone who is broken can be fixed if placed in the potter's hands." So please check her out. Check out her Facebook page for more information. And with her this afternoon, we have Pastor Shane Franklin. Pastor Franklin is Vincentian by birth, and he hails from the community of Spring Village. On the leeward side of the island, he is Christian and ordained Seventh-day Adventist minister of the gospel. He is currently the executive secretary of the executive secretary for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in SVG, and also stewardship director and pastor for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Kingstown. Pastor Franklin received a ministerial training received his ministerial training in theology at the University of the Southern Caribbean in Trinidad, and also holds a master's degree in counseling psychology from Northern Caribbean University in Jamaica. He is married to Keisha Williams Franklin, and both are parents of 2 sons and 1 daughter. Pastor Franklin believes that Jesus is coming soon and wants to help many to be ready for this great day of redemption. So we have 2 very well qualified individuals here with master's level degrees in counseling psychology, and also life experience. I was reflecting over the past couple of days as I've been preparing for this session on the reality that we are all touched at some point by grief and loss. And that life experience, depending on how prepared we are, it can really affect us in various ways, for good or for bad. And it's, how we deal with it, as we say. So we're going to get into this topic with a few issues that we want to cover. So I just want to have the panelists give a little opening remark if they, as they wish, and then we'll get into the questions for this afternoon. I was watching the news, and every time you see someone die, whether it is through criminal activity or sickness or accident, you should think of the persons who have been affected, the persons they leave behind. You can't take on the world's troubles on your shoulders, but you should at least reflect that this is even the worst, what we might say the worst criminal or the most hardened criminal. They had somebody who loved them, somebody who they were even providing for, a child maybe that they left behind, and who now has to really grapple with the loss of their loved one. May not seem like a loved one in our eyes, but that's a reality for them. So this issue of grief really touches every single human being. So we need to really grapple with it properly and figure out how we can cope with it in such a way that we can heal and we can be better off over time. As I say, time heals all wounds, but we'll explore if that's really true and how we can make sure that it does. All right? So enough introduction there. Let's hear from our panelists. A couple opening remarks, and then we get into our questions.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I am happy to be back again to share in this seminar. Dr. Patterson was very supportive of me personally and mental health professionals in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and anything that I can do to honor her memory, I'm happy to be a part of it. I'm also happy to be sharing this stage with Pastor Franklin, a gentleman that I admire and have a lot of respect for. And I trust that as we share today on grief, something that all of us can relate to, and if you haven't yet experienced it, you will experience it at some point. I hope that we can learn something that we would share today, and that as panelists, we too can learn from you as you raise your questions. So thank you again for having me.
Well, good evening, everybody. It is certainly my pleasure and delight to also share in this great experience, and of course with my friend and sister Graves, and also Brother Patterson. I also want to join, of course, in really taking this moment to honor, of course, the memory of one who we dearly loved, and as a result, that whatever can be done, as the Bible says, your work shall follow on, and that though she is no longer here in person, yet the impact that she has made upon the lives of so many, including us who are here, that we take it a privilege to ensure that this legacy continues, which is a noble gesture. Finally, as we look at our country and being a pastor, observing funerals after funerals, even as I deal with funerals from my perspective, as I speak here, there should be one on Sunday, there is one slated for the 14th, there is one for the 24th, and there is one for the 30th. So my entire month of July, almost booked. And when I think of this, each of these persons have bereaved a family who are going through grief right now. And prior this, of course, for the many backlog of funerals, including my own mom, who I buried in the month of January, that even while I share that, I too have to deal with that reality of grief. And so this afternoon, it's certainly a pleasure for us to really address this, and I hope that somebody who is listening or who will listen will be able to grab something from this to know how to manage their emotion amidst the loss of somebody or something.
Yes, thank you very much, and you've hit the nail right there, Pastor Franklin. You know, I was actually discussing this because we host funerals quite a bit at our church, and we just got like 2 back-to-back requests. So we actually have like 3 weeks consecutively of funerals coming up. So that's a reality, and how do we? It makes me a little bit more empathetic, you know, to the work of the ministers, the pastors who have to, you know, preach at these funerals, counsel with families. I mean, we do, as lay people, we do some amount of that, but, you know, the professional counselors and the ministers, you know, we really have to pray for them to have the strength, you know, to really deal with these increasing numbers, it seems, of funerals and other types of loss. That's, you know, there are other ways in which people grieve. So our first, you know, question that we want to look at this evening is what are the causes of grief? What are the causes of grief? There are many ways that people grieve, but and you can look at many factors. But what are the causes of grief?
Okay, so like you said, there are many factors that can cause persons to grieve. You can think of the most obvious, losing someone. Grief comes about whenever there is a loss. And quite often we associate it with the loss of a person, a loved one, but we can also grieve the loss of a relationship. We can grieve the loss of a pet. We can grieve the loss of an opportunity, a home, so many different things, right, that can cause us to grieve.
All right,
Yes,
along with that, of course, retirement also for some people can lead to grief. You know, you are in this position and your whole identity and life ties around this office or this space that you come there, and sometimes it seems as if you don't want to leave there. There is nothing else occupy your life, and because you have been so absorbed into this space for so many years and have never really considered what will happen when I'm no longer here. But the day comes by when you reach the required age, and of course the organization has to make transition and they have to say to you, well, you have reached your retirement age and so we have to retire you. And of course, legally you qualify for your retirement and to get your benefit and all of that. But in your mind, your life, your identity tied around this space here, your name on that door, and now your name has to be removed from that door and you have to go home, maybe to an empty house where you don't have family there. And that in itself, as a big loss to you, can certainly bring grief. And so whereas we sometimes place greater emphasis on the grief of the fact that, like the death of a loved one, or in the case of somebody who murder or whatever, but there are these other ways that people are going through grief, but may not come out directly, but their behavior and sometimes actions pervade that they have, lost something. And sadly, from a pastoral standpoint, you sometimes find people like these in our congregation, sitting weekly, nursing these healing, and sometimes what we say from the rostrum may not even reach them in that, and they're just going through the motion weekly because on one hand, we may not know except you have the dialogue, and on the other hand, you are doing whatever, but still there are people like these within congregations who are not really being met, but they are there every week.
Yes, good point. As you were speaking there, I remember heard somebody said recently, maybe as I was reading up for this, that grief is the price we pay for loving people. So is it that we're loving too much, or we, the extent of your grief, in other words, the pain that you feel is a reflection of how closely bonded you were to the person.
Well, what I say as I look at life, I say we are all vulnerable. And we have children, we have family members, and those things just make your heart. They already have part of it, and they are part of you. And especially those who are parents, it's just there. You become vulnerable because you think about your children. If they lost, they're just a part of you. And so it doesn't matter what we do, there is something that we will attach to emotionally in this world. Except our minds are out of this world. As it says, no man is an island. So there is somebody, as much as you may not be friendly with everybody, you may not even talk to much people, but there is something that you attach to. And once that removed from you, you will feel the pain or the loss where that is concerned.
Yeah, so don't be afraid of loving people, because you think that you're going to grieve too much. I think maybe subconsciously some people may refuse to get too close to people because of that. I don't know. You can maybe want to speak to that from a counseling point of view. But that's just the nature of life, I guess. How do you balance that risk of loving with the risk of losing them?
I think it's just preparing yourself, knowing that we're living in this world is not perfect, and loss is a part of life. We will lose, we will experience loss. But like you said, let us not let that stop us from loving and opening up our hearts to love someone and to receive love from another person. Because as we will see a little later on, when we've experienced loss, the grieving period can be the best and most productive period of your life. It can come after much pain, but it's possible. So don't be afraid. Open up your heart and love and receive love.
All right, thank you very much. Our next we want to look at is the effects of grief. What are the effects of grief? It can come in different ways, but let's look at, explore what are some of the ways that grief affects us?
Well, grief affects us in so many different ways. Emotionally, we experience feelings of sadness. This person that we were really close to, we've lost them, they're now gone, no longer with us. Sometimes we may experience joy, and other times we balance between the sadness and the joy. Let's take, for example, you're taking care of a loved one who is ill. If they die, or when they die, you're sad that they're gone, but there might be that happiness within you that you no longer have to work so hard to take care of them. You can pretty much have your life back. You can fulfill your dreams, go and pursue whatever goals you might have for yourself.
And you might think they're out of their pain as well.
And they're out of their pain as well. So it can be a bit difficult balancing the joy with the sadness, but it's just part of life, is what we experience. There's also physical effects. Some persons complain of feeling nauseous. Some persons experience headache, stomach ache, backache, all types of aches. You go to the doctor and you say, Doc, this is how I'm feeling. The doctor tells you to run so many different tests, nothing shows up. You're actually grieving, right? There are also spiritual effects of grief. For some persons, that's the time when they question God. They wonder, if God is so loving, why is he allowing me to go through this horrific, painful experience? On the other hand, for some persons, grief, spiritually, they can experience a high. That's when they're most close to God. That's when they experience God as their very best and dearest friend. So it can affect us in so many different ways, positively and negatively as well.
All right, Pastor, want to add?
Yes, so just to add to that, along in relation to the emotional side, some people encounter panic attacks because of the fact that somebody close to you died, maybe a friend, and so your own mortality, comes in view, and you check your life, and so for some people, they're even afraid to sleep in the night because they feel that they may die, and as a result of that leads to anxiety and, all of these other, emotional triggers that comes as a result of grief. Feeling guilty as well. Sometimes, the truth be told, in cases of a loss, not everybody who cries because of the loss in a sense of that. Sometimes they cry because of what they should have done and they did not do, and sometimes maybe the way they should have treated somebody. And old parents might have asked you to give me some water or do something, and you took it for granted, and then by the time you go and come back, the person gone, and then for you're beating yourself for the rest of the life. What difference you doing what they ask you could have made in their life for the last moment. And so some people grieve because of guilt that they did not do what they're supposed to do. And the lesson out of that is that we must be so mindful, especially those around us who we relate to, that every moment we have to be kind to them or to say kind things to others. We do it because we never know when will be the last moment, and none of us will want to know that we say something bad to somebody and a little after that you hear the person passed away, and how it will bring you now to how are you going to reconcile and deal with that guilt of knowing that you did not do what you should have done, what was expected of you to do, or you did not say the right thing, or you say the wrong thing, and then the person gone, and there is no means for you to reconcile or say something to them. And that too is really one of the strong areas. Parents or children who neglect their parents, whether they're overseas or somewhere in the country, and then the time comes, they didn't expect their parents to die, and so they show up now at the funeral, and sometimes they make the most expression there, not because of the fact that they're really so sorrowful of the loss, but for the fact that what they should have done during the lifespan of the person, they did not do, and now the person gone. There is no way you can redo what has happened. So guilt is one of those, critical areas.
That's so true. Really have to make use of the time that we have while we have our loved ones. It really, grief touches on so many issues. I don't want to go ahead of the questions, but it reminds me as you're speaking of an illustration that Dr. Gary Collins gives in his book on Christian counseling. He compares two, and these are two sisters in church, right? In the same church. Both of them lost their husbands, but one dealt with it in a positive way. The other one, partly because of this suddenness with which she lost her husband, she just never recovered. She withdrew from the rest of the, her friends and family and so on, to the extent that she died very soon after her husband died. And, as much as they tried to help her to, re-engage, get involved with, things that she used to like doing, hobbies and so on, she just never did. Her church sister, on the other hand, she was a bit more positive than she allowed person. Of course, she had her time when she mourned and so on, but she adjusted. And eventually, she came around and sort of normalized her life again. It took a lot of work, but she did, with the support of her family and friends. So it just, and they said that the one who died soon after her husband, they remarked that she died of a broken heart. Because the grief took such hold of her that she just couldn't see herself, without her husband, carrying on without her husband. And it reminded me of a sister I knew when I was much younger. And she died, and the husband died soon after. Again, because of that spousal connection and, the feeling of not being able to carry on. How do you deal with situations like those? How do you help persons to realize I can move on, I can, get back to some sort of sense of purpose and so on?
Well, to start with, it is important for couples to understand from the onset of preparing for marriage that marrying to somebody does not automatically move your friendship from others, because you still have to have a holistic life, and your social dimension is critical. Of course, there is boundaries in terms of what you do and how you relate to other friends, but you cannot shut out everybody and think that the only person significant to you is your spouse. And that is why, in many cases, people are so broken when it comes to divorce. People are so broken when it comes to being bereaved, because of the fact that you have tailored your whole identity around this one person, that you can't see yourself relating whole to others. And nothing wrong if you have a girls out or a man out or whatever, or you have balanced friends across, so that at least what that does in moments like these, because of the networking you have good support to build you. Because it's one thing for somebody to come to console you. It's a different thing when somebody who knows you and who close to you come to console you. I come to console you, but you don't know me. Yes, you may accept me as a pastor. But when you have friends who are there for you, it helps to lift you. And so sometimes even being in the church, there is no guarantee that you may have friends there. Your association as a member, but there is a difference of having somebody who you can talk with or relate to. And so persons have to pay attention, even now, even if they are married, to the level of social networking they have, because that will determine the level or the depth or the longevity of their grief and how much they can cope, not having persons around that are considered your friend in corners that can come and sit with you, not just mere because you lose somebody, but who knows you and who can watch your back and try to help you along the way. So this is one of the fundamental reasons. So for persons who are hearing, while it's okay that you have your husband or your wife and you may describe them as your best friend, it is utmost important that you have other friends, and spouses have to be okay with that, because at the end of the day, no man is an island. I may not be there to do what my wife needs to, so she has to build networking in the event something happened to her, and so likewise for me, and so likewise for partners in relationships, so that your life can go on even if you lose somebody like your spouse, closest and dearest to you.
Yeah, yes, and what Pastor is saying is so true, because the strength of your support system determines to a great extent how long you stay in your grief and how well you're able to navigate through it. So having that support system is really critical to recovery from loss of any kind.
Yeah.
So we actually segueing into two questions at the same time. We're going to be looking at, so we've already started, based on Pastor's comment, looking at what psychologists and counselors refer to as complicated grief, or some persons might call it, I think, prolonged grief. You know, and again, I just said, it depends on several factors, how well we deal with this grief. You want to define complicated grief for us?
Complicated grief, or some people refer to it as delayed grief. It's when you're not going through the process as smoothly as you should. Perhaps you're taking a longer time than is predicted. I say predicted because the researchers say grief should last between 6 months to about 2 years, thereabout, right? That's
Does that
what they
depend on
say.
who you're grieving or what you're grieving?
I guess it depends, yes. And the attachment you had to the thing or the person, right? Because remember, we're not just grieving because we've lost someone. Like I said earlier, you can grieve the loss of an opportunity. You can grieve the loss of a friendship, different things. So complicated grief, you're not navigating your way through smoothly as you should. It's affecting your daily functioning. Perhaps you're showing up late to work. Perhaps on the road, you're exhibiting road rage. Somebody just cuts across you and you fling to bad word at them. Yeah. The boss at work might just say something to you and you're getting antsy, real irritated and agitated. Everything just bothers you. The children annoy you. Everything is just a bother. Yeah? So you're not going through it smoothly. And that can be, a number of factors can account for that. Some persons experience what we call cumulative grief. I experienced that personally, where you just experience a lot of losses at the same time or in quick succession. Back in 2014 for me, I received 3 heavy blows. I lost the relationship, I lost my mother, and just 1 week after burying my mother, I lost my father. So I lost 3 pillars in my life, 3 people who would uphold me. And it was difficult, extremely difficult. Now, delayed grief, I tell you, it's not easy. I would say what would help people to go through the grieving process smoothly, it depends on how you were prior to your losses. What was your belief system? What was your support system like? Those are the things that would buffet you as you go through and prevent you from experiencing delayed grief
Okay,
or
Pastor, you wanna add?
complicated.
Just to add, as I think of complicated grief, I like the description in the weather wall, where you have a trough system that is moving very slow over a country, and you just have this rain pouring down constantly. And we have had that in St. Vincent. Mm-hmm. And the trough, the weather, the rain just coming, the weather just like it's not moving at all. It's just there, and the rain keep ponging and ponging and ponging until, and for this now I liken it onto that whole context of complicated grief, where persons just stick in that environment. And so one of the things that is very important for anybody in such situation, as you look at yourself, you have to ask yourself, is this where I want to be? And prepare yourself to make the transition to get there. And that's where, in some cases, and in many cases, a counselor comes in to assess with you the state of your emotion. This is where you want to be. You're feeling pain. And therefore, these are steps you have to take if you want to get out of this situation. Because if you don't, you will remain there for a very, very long time. And there are some practical things that persons have to do, especially in the case of bereaved. You have this special pillow that, the person, and you still want to brace it up. And as you brace it up, it brings pain, the picture on the bed and all of these things there. And so you are, while you want to keep memories, at the same time, the memory has to be balanced, because if at the moment the memory is bringing pain, then you have to distinguish between the memory that brings pain and the memory that brings joy. And one wants to know that their minds can be channeled to the joyful memory that will lift and empower persons, not the sad memories that is going to keep you in that complicated grief where that is concerned.
You know, I'm going to back up a little bit, right? Because we launched into this discussion on grief, and we didn't talk about I should say stages or phases of grief, because they say you don't really have these supposed stages. Is it Kubler-Ross? These stages of grief, they don't necessarily happen one after the other. They could happen, you know. So how do you look at are we talking about stages or phases, and how does that interact with the whole complicated grief issue?
I like what Pastor said. He used the word stuck. And that's what you don't want to experience. You don't want to be stuck in any of the stages of grief. So based on Kubler-Ross, her model of grief, she was careful to say it's not a linear experience. So you don't go through stage 1, stage 2, 3, 4, and 5. It can be like a scribbly paper. Picture paper that a child has scribbled on. It can be like that. So you experience denial when you just receive news of the loss, whatever the loss is. You go through that phase. You can't believe this. No, I just can't believe this is happening. No, it's not true. He's going to come home later on, like he usually does every day. Then you might move into anger. You might be angry at the person for dying. You couldn't hold on a little longer for me? You know I'm coming. You might be angry at God for taking this individual. If your loved one died at the hospital, you might be angry at the medical personnel that are there. You might say, maybe they didn't do enough to save my mom, my dad, my child, whoever. You go through the phase of bargaining. You want to give something in exchange. You want the situation to change. So you want to have your loved one back again. And you're willing to strike a deal or a bargain. You might strike that bargain with God. God, I'm going to really be obedient to you, follow all of your commandments if you will only give me one more chance with my loved one. You move through again another phase, which is depression. This is really where things are, you're really thinking about things now. The sadness might come to you, and you just can't believe, you know, this is really happening to you. A lot of persons tend to get stuck in that phase, so much to the point that they no longer take care of themselves. They don't comb their hair anymore. They don't brush their teeth anymore. They don't dress up as fancy as they used to. And it's easy to see sometimes. Some people hide it very well. For others, it's right there. And when we have loved ones the persons we know that are grieving, we have to look out for these things. You know, you have a friend who's always Miss Prim and Proper, or always Mr. Neat and Fine, well put together, but realize, it should not even match. Something off. Yeah, that should ring a bell. The final stage is acceptance. You've come to terms now with the fact that you've lost your loved one, you've lost this opportunity, you've lost this relationship. What are you going to do about it now? Right? So you move through these stages, not in a linear way, like I said, but it might be you start at denial, then you might jump straight to bargaining, then you might go to acceptance. The next week or month, you might find yourself back at being angry. Yeah, it can be like that. So you're moving through the stages.
On a personal note, I must say I have been through all of those stages, and it's like a roller coaster.
It is.
Which is why when I was thinking of this topic, I was wondering if I was ready to have this topic here as a discussion topic. But based on certain considerations and where I think how I believe God has led, I figured I was ready to do it, but I would not have been this ready a few months ago. And even now, I'm still grappling with certain issues, and I'm still praying. I'm still seeking for answers to certain things. But I believe I'm at a certain level of acceptance, I would say, in terms of what has happened. But there's something that kind of still nagging me, right? You just said that we just talked about acceptance, and yet the author of this book is one of the books that AMRIE had, and she was using for, I think it was a textbook in one of the courses on grief that she was doing. It's captioned The 5 Ways We Grieve, right? It's by Dr. Susan Berger. And one of the things that Dr. Berger said in a video clip that I saw was that grief is a lifelong process. And I said to myself, but I don't want to be grieving for life. What does she mean by that? Is it that we talk about acceptance, and yet she's saying grieving is a lifelong process? Those kind of sound contradictory.
Well, what I could see it from the perspective that sometimes by the time you finish dealing with one thing, because remember, based on what grief is loss from various dimensions. And so whatever that loss is, it comes right back home. Even as I relate, so for example, like one of my colleagues now, Pastor Williams, lost his mother. Now I have to be there at that funeral. So even though I have already come to this stage of acceptance for my mother, that situation now will then bring back something. And as I relate to other people, dealing with funerals, dealing with the loss, dealing with members in the church who lose a loved one. So when it comes to grief, that's why it can become, it's a lifelong journey. The key is how we cope and manage, which is important, and get over the strides and overcome, because we will always be interfacing with some kind of loss around us as long as life continues.
And to add just a little to that, the persons especially that we have lost, they're always going to be a part of us. So it doesn't matter how many years roll by, the memory of them is not going to be gone, it's not going to diminish, they're always going to be a part of us. Dr. Patterson would always be your wife. My mom, she will always be my mom, and whenever I'm making reference to a mother, my mother, it would always be her, even though she's no longer here with us. So it is a lifelong process. It doesn't mean you have to feel pain for the whole of the process. So it doesn't matter how many years roll on, you're not going to be feeling, or you shouldn't be feeling, that intense pain that you felt at the initially. Yeah.
That is so true. So I want to look then at what are some of the ways, how do we address grief in a way that helps us to grow emotionally and spiritually? Can we just pray it away? Or just engage in all the hobbies to take our mind off it, or just get down in our work to get it out of the forefront of our minds? How do we deal with it in a way that helps us to get beyond it, to put that in a positive light? Yeah.
Well, first of all, one of the things I try to help persons when it comes to mental health, I always want them to see from the graphic side of physical health. In that if you have a cut on your foot, it does not matter how much immediate treatment you put on it there, it has to go through the process of healing. So by the night or the next day it is swollen, of course it has to bleed, then it will be swollen. And even if the doctor, for whatever reason, numb that area, just as what we normally experience when we do extraction, after that wear away, you have to feel the pain. So that we want to help people to understand, just as how physically you have to flow through that pain and come to the healing stage, it is in similar manner with the mental side. Just that nobody opening your brain and putting just plastering and whatever the case inside of there too. But the whole aspect of how we think and how we view things and all of those, and that's where, as a counselor, that you want to help people to channel their mind in a way that it could help them to cope and to handle things. So when it comes to that side of grieving, one must appreciate it's a process that you must go through. And even if you want to jump to say, well, me accept the death, well, me accept it, the reality still, the other aspect will catch you along the way. So the thing is that folks have to understand this is the reality. It's a process. And prepare that you will feel pain. You will have to go through this journey. And so you have to now allow the process to take place. What you don't want, as we have emphasized before, that you don't want to stick at any of the place there. But you cannot rush it. You have to allow the process to take. Just like the cut, you will do whatever to make sure you keep it clean, you do the dressing, but you can't put a timeline to say, well, this cut here, by tomorrow you go heal up, make you go back out the road. No, we can't put a timeline to that cut on your foot. You just have to walk with it and do the necessary things to make sure that that physical cut is healed properly where that is concerned.
Yes, that is so true, Pastor. And it's a difficult concept for us to accept, especially because we're living in a fast-paced society.
I want to move on.
And we want everything done now, very quickly. So we have a headache, give me to Advil day. Something happened, we go for the quickest and fastest solution. And we try to do the same with grief. We lose someone and we take a drink on the head. Mm-hmm. That's what they say. That's what they say. Yeah, you take a drink on the head and you're irie after that. You burn a weed on the head and you're good after that. But you must go through the process. There are no shortcuts.
So that applies to, sorry to cut, but that applies to, it may not be the person who is the griever that wants to fast track the process. It may be other people want to say to you, but get over that now. I mean, so much time done gone. You know, what do you say to persons to not to rush other people, you know, in their grieving process?
Yeah, it can be both the griever wanting to rush the process and persons around you, because nobody really wants to deal with this sad. That's why a lot of people are not counselors, you know, because nobody wants to deal with sad things and sad stories. We're like, come on, move over it. Come on, move on, get over it. A lot of persons, we don't have the patience to deal with people when they're going through those moments. So we have to learn patience.
You know, when I started to read up on these things, and I couldn't believe somebody write a whole book about grieving. And I said, but that takes and she would have had to interview a lot of people and so on, and other counselors too, and you know, which is why there are persons who do higher studies in these things, because to actually sit down with somebody for weeks and weeks, maybe even months, to help them to, and this is not the majority of people, I think this is most persons, within a reasonable amount of time, they will, you know, come to grips with what has happened. But there are some persons, as I say, due to various factors, they may have challenges, you know, grappling with the loss of the loved one and how to move on. As the example I gave with the two sisters, you know, one who dealt with it positively, other negatively. One of the things that Dr. Berger mentions is that there are the 5 ways we grieve, I'll list them. She talks about people who are nomads. There's the categories that she uses. You can speak to each of them, whichever one you want. She talks about nomads, memorialists, normalizers, activists, and seekers. All right, those are the 5 broad categories that she uses. And I was trying to put myself in a category. And I found at least 3 that I kind of fit. Maybe, 3. So, memorialist is one. Memorialist, the name kind of speaks for itself, like people who try to continue the memory of the individual in some way, formally or informally. They might plant a tree in memory of the person. I remember somebody gave me a plant, one of my wife's good friends. Gave me a plant that I still have. So every time I look at this plant, I can't let this plant die. So taking care of the plant, you know, think that out, memorialists. Then you have activists, you know, persons who, it's kind of similar to memorialists, but the person maybe goes a bit further in terms of, setting up some kind of maybe foundation or something that helps to maintain maybe they're thinking about what the person would have done if they were around still, that kind of thing. And then you have seekers, which is a more spiritual, and we're going to come to that just now, a more spiritual person or outlook on the loss, where you're trying to figure out what is the deeper meaning behind this. How do we figure out where we fit in this whole framework? And it may not be one or the other, as I said, maybe several.
In a case like that, it may base more on the actions that the person pervade. And again, with that, it is important that, there is balance with it. In terms of the memorial side, you have to ensure that you are reflecting on the positive thing of the person that should serve as a motivating drive for you, and not just doing the thing that is bellowing you into continual sorrowness, that every time you think, so if we are here now and this is going on and then Brother Patterson is just breaking down, crying down the place here, then we know this cannot be the ideal for Brother Patterson to be a part of. If this thing, every time we come here, he crying down and he crying and the whole family still crying, then we know we cannot have this as an ideal. So the thing must serve as a positive motivation that will inspire the family that this person has left a great contribution, and hence, as a result, we want to build on this to continue to make impact where that is concerned. So the whole aspect along these lines and the various factors you listed there, the driving force behind of them must be on the positive side to help you to keep on those things that the person certainly, as you mentioned, would have wanted to do if they were alive today in those regards.
And I would say the individual who is exhibiting one of these categories, whether you're a nomad, is it nomad? Nomad, right. They have to assess themselves, ask themselves, what's my motivation? Am I trying to run away from feeling the pain of the grief? Am I doing it too soon? Have I gone through the process? So you have to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, why are you doing this? Because I can tell you, like we said earlier on, there are no shortcuts through grief. If you escape it, this path is going to meet you down the road. So it makes sense to deal with it now, but make sure you know what's your motivation, and that your motivation is pure, and it is, you're doing it on the heels of the recovery process, and not to run away from the pain of the grief.
I want to ask this sort of penultimate question, right? As you talk about the process, from the pastor's point of view and from your point of view as a counselor, we had a similar discussion in one of our first episodes, where at what point does a pastor refer somebody to a counselor or a psychologist? Well, in which case you might be referring them to yourself, Pastor. Okay. But at what point do you as a pastor refer somebody to a counselor? And at what point does maybe a counselor refer somebody to a pastor? If you understand, in terms of the grieving.
Well, if I start in terms of referral, doing the assessment and based on the nature of where the person is, going through depression, going through emotional grief, that person, of course, we may basically need to see a counselor, because, of course, as a pastor, you may not have the time to consistently meet with the person to help them through the journey, and you don't want a case where you meet them once or twice, but they're still struggling. So in that case, you will want to ensure that the person gets some continual checkup and assessment, and in that regard. On the other hand, the person is before the counselor, and the counselor is saying, I don't think I want to go back to church anymore. I no longer believe in God, and whatever and all of that the cases may be. And so the counselor may not be in the right frame to bring the spiritual perspective and at least draw references from the Bible in context to help the person from that spiritual side. So each of us has to know the area of competency,
Yes.
and where we need to bring in others in the whole networking to help somebody. And similar in the physical world, that a medical doctor, but the person comes and they realize it's something to do with kidney, they will not fight, they will refer you to a kidney specialist or whoever specialist to ensure that they could give you much more sound advice, because you are looking at the holistic development of a person and not just trying to see how much you alone can do, but the key of building networking in these situations. And just to draw reference, just last week, Dr. Providence wanted to visit the home of the last victim, the family up at Murray Village, that young guy who got killed this Sunday. And she got me through Dr. Aki, and she said, you know, because of the nature of this, though she's a psychiatrist there, but you know, for the family to lose somebody back to back like that, where is God and how they will see that? And so what to say in those moments? You may just need somebody with a spiritual side to help and to pray and to give that side. So even though she has her area that she knows mentally they will be affected by, but value the networking. And so we went together. So she provided perspective, and then I could provide perspective while we visit the family there, and at least could have able to bring some consolation to help them to cope through this difficult time in losing two sons back to back in murder as it is there. So just drawing that as a reference to show the value of it.
Yeah, I'm happy that you asked that question, because it's sharing light on an issue that we didn't do too well with as a church. You know, most issues, we spiritualized it, and we just dealt with it from a spiritual point of view. But there are different dimensions to us as human beings. There's the spiritual dimension, the emotional, the social, the mental, and all of that. And God has blessed his church with resource persons that can assist in all of these areas. And so when persons are going through grief or any form of distress, the effort must be a collaborative effort. Because pastor can do his spiritual aspect, but if the mental aspect is neglected, the person is still not whole. If counselors help the person with their mental aspect, but the spiritual aspect is not addressed, the person is still not whole. So it's really showing us that we need to work collaboratively so that persons can experience, through healing, full recovery.
Thank you very much for that. As our final question, final little segment here as we wrap up. I remember a couple months ago, we had a psychologist at our church addressing this issue of grief and loss, because quite a few of our members over the past few years would have, lost loved ones, and I think it was the Women's Ministries Department that brought the psychologist in. That was actually Dr. Joselle Miller. And I remember a couple persons standing up in the congregation to, share their experiences and their points. And a particular sister was expressing that, I think it was her sister who died. And you could, from the way she was speaking, you could tell like there was still a certain pain there. I mean, if she didn't say it, you wouldn't know, right? Because this is not something that people would normally talk about. But it just said to me that, and it reminded me of something else that I came to realize a bit more since AMRIE died, that there are a lot of people who are walking around with, and we said it before in other words, with hurts. Right? There are a lot of persons who are going around with various types of, and maybe still in different phases of the grieving process. I came to see this as an opportunity for I don't know what you think about this, you can let me know. I came to see this existence or the prevalence of grief among people as an opportunity for the church. In particular, yes, counselors have their role and so on. But that is something I'm seeing as a particular opportunity for the church because I think there's an answer there, there's an aspect of the answer that I think only the church can provide. I say that because I remember hearing about a young man who lost his mother, and as a result of that, he lost his faith in God. How do you help people to reconcile grief with faith in God? Or, in the process of grieving, not to lose their faith in God? That's our final question for we.
Well, one of the things we always have to do when we are orienting and preparing people to come to know Christ, we have to help them to understand the dynamics. And one of the things about God I love about him, he is so transparent. The Bible does not picture everything perfect, so that God helps us to see through the word that there are people who went through almost everything that we can be going through today. And he has this there so that at least we can appreciate that even though we serve him, and he's our protector and he's our guide, he helps us to appreciate that we are living in a real sinful world, and in a world where we are confronted by what we know. We have just discussed this in our quarterly for this quarter, the great controversy, a battle, and also the effect of what sin has done to humanity. And God has not shied away from that. He has ensured that through the word that we are exposed to this reality, so that being there, being in church, is not a guarantee that everything is going to go perfect. You will still feel pain as the person in the world. However, your faith in God will give you a better perspective to cope with your challenges if you trust God. So orienting people and not trying to paint a side of God that people just looking with expectation that everything is going to go my way. And so my God will supply all my needs. And while that is true, but in the context of how, and also God will take care of everything, and then people will move away with the pie in sky. God is going to take care of everything and make me lose my job here, and so me coming back to church. And so it's how people perceive God. And that's why in the congregation, we have to ensure that we open the reality of God. And one thing I always say as a leader, I don't have to defend God. God can and is more than able to defend himself. The Bible can defend itself anyway. It doesn't matter who's trying to fight it. So God can defend himself. What God wants of me is that my faith in him, I must now be able to testify that of my experience, so that people know, people can't fight my experience. This is what I experience. So I have the right to share what I have encountered. And that's what God wants to give people, real experience. And just yesterday, as I was conducting a Bible study, there's a person who has grief, lost a loved one, a child. And in the conversation, I brought up that if the devil knew the impact of Job's story through the ages, he would have never touched Job. He would have said, based on the outcome, he would have never interfered with Job and never put himself in the way to deal with Job. He would have sought in the thing there where that is concerned. You know? Yes, so that's my piece on that.
Yes, thank you. Want to add final comments?
Pastor, he said it. I just want to reiterate the point about the power of our testimony. Yes? All of us go through difficulties in life, and we need to be more open in sharing our testimonies with others. Some persons are shy, so you may not want to stand up in the church and say, well, God did this for me. I was really broke, but the Lord blessed me with this, and so forth. But in our own little secret corners, when we interact with others, let us brag about God. And let us be honest. Let us say, this has been my experience. I have lost X, I've lost Y, but God has sustained me. My faith has kept me. This is what God has done for me. And that would help people, because for some persons, the idea of God is really abstract. We can't see him, we can't touch him. But then when we sit together, and you say to me, Chisette, I experienced that. And this is how it helped me, and this is how I got through it. that resonates better with me. And so that can also help persons to have that belief in God.
You know, I remember a friend of mine saying that, contrary to the example I gave, the death of his father was a trigger to draw him closer to God. It helped him to find his way back to God. And it shows you, you know, it's a question of how you process what you're experiencing, which goes back to the values that you have and, you know, your spiritual outlook, as Pastor talked about. You know, so we really have to check ourselves. And in psychology I always reflect on this term that AMRIE used to use. I mean, it's a psychological term. ANTS, A-N-T-S, automatic negative thoughts. Spiritually, we would say this is the carnal mind. Right? At least that's how I look at it. You have to be careful. You have to guard those ants. Guard against those ants. And in terms of reflecting on, you know, God and grief and how you process this, think about this. Persons who are atheists, who don't believe in God, what is their answer to grief? It is really silence. There's really no answer, no ultimate answer that somebody who does not believe in God can give to somebody who is grieving. All right, the loss of a loved one, for example, as we've been focusing on. No real satisfactory answer. And it makes you wonder, why would somebody why would somebody not believe in God? All right, when the opposite of believing in God leaves you nowhere. All right, leaves you really without answers in terms of, what it basically means is that when somebody dies, that is it. There's no eternity. All right? When you're dead, you're done, as some people say, right? Why would you choose that? It says that there's something fundamentally wrong with the heart of mankind and our human outlook. So I really want to encourage us, those who are here and those who are viewing, you know, to see in the midst of our grief, as we grapple with grief, as we wrestle with it, as you know, as Jacob wrestled with God, as we wrestle with it, you know, we can find on the other side of it, you know, in time, as we wrestle with God, He will give the blessing. He will help us to come to grips with our grief and even grow in the process. I always remark that even though the Bible says that Job was a perfect man, it also says at the end, Job admitted that he had a deeper appreciation for who God was after he went through what he went through. It's not an easy road. I mean, you know, we can all say as of having been touched by grief in some way, loss in some way. It's not easy. But through faith, because we walk by faith, not by sight, we can grow through our grieving process. All right, so again, I want to really thank our panelists for being with us and sharing with us from their knowledge and their experience this evening. It was really good, really rich, and again, thanks to those who are here and those who will view. I trust that this discussion this evening would be a blessing to you. All the best, keep the faith, and God bless until our next seminar. All the best to you.